today, we're going to take a look at 6 of our favorite early round targets. We're going to use the Football Guys consensus ADP, and that has data from everywhere: ESPN, CBS, Yahoo, Sleeper, MFL, Underdog for best ball. That's going to give you some extra upside added into your ADP. NFFC, some high stakes drafts. We are getting this average draft position, by the way. So whenever you hear us say ADP, we mean average draft position. And we are getting this from all over the place. And this can be found over at footballguys.com/ADP. And Dave, it's a phenomenal tool. I think it really helps us get a good gauge of what we're seeing throughout fantasy football. For example, we talk about some of the differences that we might see. If I go and look at Breece Hall being drafted as the number 2 overall player on CBS, and then the number 9 player over on my fantasy league, there are some crazy differences that you might see even early in round 1, where you'll see a 7-spot difference. And so this is where, looking at a tool like this is going to be really helpful to kind of help you gauge how you're going to attack your draft as it comes up here towards the end of August, early September.
And before we get into
Now,
the meat of the one
yeah,
thing I want to say real quickly, I think the best thing about ADP, it's not necessarily like the way that you want to draft your team, but ADP does help you kind of get an idea of maybe where your league mates will be drafting players. And I think that's probably the best purpose of ADP, is trying to anticipate where other players are going to get drafted, because your league mates are going to stick pretty closely to ADP. But if you're listening to our show and you're consuming content and you're kind of fleshing out your own rankings, I think that gives you an edge, because you are able to kind of free yourself from the shackles of ADP and just draft the players that you think are the best values.
yeah, and that's what we're here to do today. We're going to talk about players that are not only just the best values, but we think are going to end up being safest players in these early rounds, players with high upside in these early rounds. These are the guys that if Dave and I sat down and started doing drafts today, we would likely be targeting in most of those drafts. So I'm going to kick us off really quick, because the player I'm going to talk about has the highest average draft position out of everyone we're talking about today, and it's Bijan Robinson. I've talked about Bijan all throughout this offseason. So have you. So have a lot of people. There is a ton of excitement for a guy who last season was the running back 20 in points per game. It's very odd that we would see this much excitement for a player that didn't really even finish all that high. And I think most of that just ends up being because of how we were hurt and betrayed by Arthur Smith and this Falcons offense. We need to get over that. We need to get over the way that we paint pictures of these players and we treat them differently, and we think that it's all about them and they're the ones that really hurt us. And last year was not about poor performance from Bijan Robinson. It was not. Like, anyone who watched the games or even just looked at the stat line can tell you the guy was performing. It was all about the usage. And this is not the same staff. This is not the same roster as last season. Just to give you an example of how bad the usage was, Dave, you mentioned this on one of our previous episodes. Tyler Algier had twice as many touches as any Falcons player last season from inside the 5. Just to give you that look there, Bijan Robinson had 3 carries from inside the 5-yard line. It's absolutely insane to think that you have this player who's probably the best athlete on the team, probably the best player on the team, and you're going to let him touch the ball 3 times from within the 5-yard line. It really sticks out to me the way he was used. Raheem Morris, the head coach for the Atlanta Falcons, has already talked about this, and you're going to hear this quote over and over all preseason long. He said, "Our plan for the offense is get the ball to Bijan as much as you can in as many ideal situations as you possibly can." Dave, I think I understand the game of football pretty well. I have some good experience with it, but I don't think you have to be an expert to say that an ideal situation to get the ball to your star running back is right there by the end zone at the goal line. So, hearing the Falcons talk about how they want to get Bijan into this Christian McCaffrey type role, I just want to go over this last year of what Christian McCaffrey did, what Kyron Williams did, the running back for new Falcons offensive coordinator Zach Robinson. Christian McCaffrey had 18 carries inside the 5-yard line and 34 carries inside the 10-yard line. Kyron Williams, 17 carries inside the 5 and 32 inside the 10-yard line. Reminder, I'm going to go back. Bijan Robinson, 3 carries inside the 5-yard line. This is what we're talking about. A guy who's has the opportunity to 10x his potential touches from inside the 10-yard line, from inside the 5-yard line, and actually get meaningful touches that will turn into points. Kirk Cousins being on this team makes the Falcons that much better. He actually checked down to the running back quite a bit. We saw even Alexander Madison averaging 4 targets per game in weeks 1 through 8. So Bijan Robinson, for me, You're going to get a floor of a guy who is already extremely talented, but you're going to get the ceiling of a guy who is going to get some incredible usage. And for me, looking at Football Guy's ADP right now, he's going as the number 7 player, the running back 3. I think he has every single chance to be the number 1 player going into 2025 fantasy drafts, Dave.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot. McCaffrey, Bijan, Brees, they're pretty flat for me, and I understand why Christian McCaffrey deserves to be going as the RB1 because he's done it for consecutive seasons and
Right.
he's really been unlocked in San Francisco. But you just start looking at basic age curves here. Like Christian McCaffrey is going to start trending down at some point. Bijan Robinson and Brees Hall are going to continue to get better. We can easily see that flip going into next year. But you talk about the red zone usage. I mean, that was the biggest hang up for Bijan last year. Like Desmond Ritter and Cordell Patterson each had as many carries inside the 5-yard line as Bijan Robinson did. And then you start looking at like targets inside the 10-yard line. Bijan had 6, Jonnu Smith had 5. Like Jonnu Smith was almost getting the same usage inside the 10 as Bijan Robinson was last year. So it was mind numbing. Like I remember week 1, like seeing Tyler Algier come out with all these touches, and then Bijan Robinson later in the season when he did finally start getting in the fold and getting more usage. As soon as they'd get inside the red zone, he'd be watching from the sidelines. So it was maddening last year. We've got to assume now that with Kirk Cousins and a more potent offense, Zach Robinson hopefully bringing in a little bit more of a faster pace to the offense, that all bodes well for Bijan Robinson's outlook.
It's nuts to think that Kyron Williams had 14 more carries inside the 5-yard line. Little Kyron Williams, 5'9", 195 pounds, getting that many more carries inside the 5. That's your goal line back. So everything for me is pointing up for Bijan Robinson. And I think that's why drafters and rankers are not shying away from ranking Bijan this high. He was going as the number 7 pick overall last year, and he's going as the number 7 overall pick again in fantasy drafts. So I think there's a reason why we're seeing that. Now, before we go to our next player and Dave reveals his big secret round 1 player, I want to remind you guys we have a bunch of different ways you can enjoy this show here on youtube.com/ at football guys fantasy. Like and subscribe to the channel. Like this episode, videos are going to come out the day before the audio, so you could get access to that even earlier by making sure you're subscribed to the YouTube podcast. Always has 10 to 15 minutes of extra bonus stuff right there at the beginning. And this is our last week for our listener league giveaway. It's just going to be exclusive to our YouTube subscribers. So if you're listening to this in the podcast and you're like, hey, I want to be in your listener league, go on over to YouTube, subscribe to the channel, and then you're going to do this. Okay. For the one spot that we're giving away for the show's listener league here, you're going to work in the phrase in the comments, 7 weeks left. All right. 7 weeks left, because we got 7 weeks left until we are actually watching NFL football, Dave. It's exciting. I can't wait. I absolutely can't wait. All right, let's get to your first player here that you are targeting in the early rounds of drafts. And just to get the caveat, we like a lot more than just these 6 players in the early rounds of drafts, but these were some of our favorites that we really wanted to target. So Dave, why don't you kick us off with your first guy?
And this is a guy that I actually think is mispriced. And, we talked in the opening of the show on the podcast side about like straying from ADP a little bit. I'm okay straying from ADP and reaching for this guy, depending on the platform, sometimes 3 or 4 picks early. Amon-Ra St.Brown right now is being drafted on average as the wide receiver 5. But when you look at his ADP across different sites, like in CBS right now, he's going 9th overall. In Best Ball 10s, he's going 8th overall. In RT Sports, he's going 8th overall. Yahoo, he's going 8th overall. And I've got this guy in standard or PPR formats as my 105 off the board. I think that if you're getting him as low as 8 in ADP, you can reach for him as high as 5. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. This guy was a wide receiver 7 in 2022. And there were some concerns about it maybe being a little bit fluky. Well, he completely bucked that by going as the wide receiver 3 in 2023. And I was pounding the table for this guy last offseason. He was my guy. We talked about it. He was typically falling at that 1-2 turn, and I preferred late picks last year because I knew you can get Amon-Ra St.Brown at the top of round 2, and I felt like it was mispriced. And now after his huge breakout, after his top 3 finish, you're still getting him at a discount. This guy's been top 8 in targets in back-to-back years. He hit a plus 30% target share last year, which puts him in very rarefied air. He had double-digit PPR points in all but 1 game last year, despite playing through different injuries. If you watch Receiver on Netflix, he played 1 game with hand, foot, mouth. He also dealt with ankle injuries. He
He
dealt
had
with head
hands, feet,
injuries.
and a mouth. That's nuts.
It's a yeah, and I mean that's something where like that would put most people out for months, and he played through it like just unbelievable. We know he's a tough guy, but really cool show. If you haven't watched Receiver on Netflix yet, be sure to check that out. But Amon-Ra St. Brown is simply just a guy that's trending up. He's going into year 4 now. Every single year he has been in the league, he has seen his targets, receptions, yards, touchdowns, yard per target, yard per reception, like every single metric has trended up every single year. And it's not crazy to think that he can continue that upward trend now going into year 4. I can go on and on about how dominant Amon-Ra's been, but you know that. Like, he's been a very good wide receiver. He went on the second half of his rookie season, kind of broke out, and has just continued to get better and better since. But despite all that, he's still going in the back half of round 1, and that's just crazy to me. I prefer him, no offense, Alfredo, but I prefer him ahead of Bijan Robinson and ahead of Brees
Yeah.
Hall. I think that he is one of those elite wide receivers that you're prioritizing ahead of running backs in the early round. But the big one for me is ahead of Justin Jefferson, and almost every single platform still has him going behind Jefferson. In a vacuum, I think Justin Jefferson is the better player, but we know that Amon-Ra St. Brown can get it done with Jared Goff. That's who he's played with his entire career, and they have a great chemistry together. Justin Jefferson, like I said, probably the better overall receiver, but we don't know what this JJ McCarthy or Sam Darnold led offense is going to look like. You know what you're getting with Amon-Ra St. Brown. So, barring injury, I think the floor for Justin Jefferson is so much lower. You're getting a very high floor with Amon-Ra St. Brown and a similar ceiling. This is a guy that if we're expecting him to continue this upward trend, he can realistically go for 1,600, 1,800 yards and finish as the overall wide receiver one. Amon-Ra St. Brown right now, given where he is getting drafted, is my favorite value in round 1.
Listen, you don't have to say no offense to me. You don't have to Ricky Bobby and be like, "Oh, I said no offense." Like I was actually going to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown. You picked him first, though, and that's how it went. But I'm actually going to ask this, Dave, because you say that you have no problem taking Amon-Ra St. Brown as high as 5. Honestly, when I look at it, I kind of question whether or not I might even take him at number 4.
Ahead of Chase.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, we go back and look at Jamar Chase. In his rookie season, he was the wide receiver 5. Okay. That took 13 touchdowns for him to rank as wide receiver 5. And then in 2023 last season, he ends up as the wide receiver 13. I get it that there's upside there. And even in 2022, he had some great point per game average at 16.6. Amon-Ra St. Brown just kind of keeps doing it. I know he doesn't have that same upside, but or I mean, maybe he does. Last season, 17 points per game. He was the wide receiver 3 overall. Year before that, wide receiver 8. I I think that we kind of discount how good Amon-Ra St. Brown is and how good that Lions offense might be. I actually think that Amon-Ra and Chase might be interchangeable at that 4th pick.
And I'm not going to push back too hard. I mean, I've said it a lot that, the top 8 is all kind of flat. We're looking at the receivers that we've discussed. You could throw Jefferson in there and then the 3 running backs as well. So I'm not going to push back a ton. I think that you can, if you really want to, you can take any of these guys number 1 overall. And I don't think that it's crazy at all. If there was one guy I'd say that I'd be willing to maybe move him ahead of, like I might put him on St. Brown ahead of Tyreek Hill because Tyreek Hill is getting up there in age, and I think
Hmm.
that would be the big concern. But Jamar Chase, I think last year some of his struggles were mostly because Joe Burrow was injured to start the year and wasn't himself, and then he had to play with Jake Browning. I'm willing to go back to the well with Jamar Chase with Joe Burrow back and healthy this year. I think that he's just a better overall receiver, and we know that he's got the chemistry with Burrow. But I'm not going to push back all that hard. Like, Amon-Ra St. Brown could go as the 101 off the board, the 105 or the 106 off the board. I don't think it's that crazy. I just prefer reaching for him a little bit because he's got the really safe floor. And then I think that we haven't even seen the ceiling yet. Despite a wide receiver 3 finish last year, I think he could improve even off of that.
Yeah, agreed. Totally. All right, let me give you my next guy. And it's funny because you and I kind of did this thing unintentionally where I'm kind of sticking with the running backs here. And this is interesting because we've had our jokes in the past. We did a mock draft where I went very running back heavy. I don't have that philosophy, altogether when I go into a draft where I'm saying I need to target running backs. But when looking at the ADP, the average draft position, and looking at who's going in the second round, I mean, you start to look around and you start to see guys with potential holes in their game or question marks that you might have with Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, Marvin Harrison Jr., Devontae Adams, Chris Olave, Kyron Williams, Drake London, Nico Collins, Devon Achane, Sam Laporta. And really, there was only kind of two guys that I looked at here and I said, huh, I really like them both. And it's kind of hard to poke holes in their game or their usage. But there was one guy I preferred. It was Travis Etienne and Derrick Henry. And I prefer Derrick Henry here because no one is coming in to take Derrick Henry's workload from him. He's gone from a worse situation to a better situation. And this is a guy that I know that we talk about him like, yes, he's getting older. Yes, he doesn't catch as many passes, but guys, the rules are out the window when it comes to Derrick Henry. And I get it. Father Time is undefeated, and maybe someday it'll happen. But Derrick Henry, he's been a top 8 running back in 4 of his last 5 seasons. And that 5th season, by the way, he was on pace to be the RB1 by a wide margin. His season got cut short due to injury, and we never really saw that happen all that often. So you have a running back who is perennially in the top 8, goes to a better team with more scoring opportunities, and we're still drafting him as the running back 8, essentially his floor. This is a player who has had double-digit rushing touchdowns in 6 straight seasons. And I know like we kind of touched on this a little bit when we talked about these rushing quarterbacks with running backs. Lamar Jackson only had 1 touchdown from inside the 5-yard line last season. This is not a guy who's going to be stealing a lot of work from Derrick Henry. When you look at what Gus Edwards was able to do, and I know people might make that comparison a little too often, but seeing that Gus Edwards had nearly as many carries from inside the 5-yard line with 23 as Derrick Henry had from inside the 10-yard line with 24 is kind of nuts. The idea that Derrick Henry could get potentially 6, 7, 8 more carries from inside the 5-yard line and probably convert at least 2 or 3 more touchdowns. You're talking about a guy, Derrick Henry, with 3 more touchdowns. He ends up being the RB2 on the season behind Christian McCaffrey last year, if that happens. And it's a dangerous game to get into what if, and especially with touchdowns because they're fluky. But this is a very good offense, a very good rushing team, and a team that's going to get opportunities near the goal line. What is honestly so interesting to me when I saw this was the splits in losses for Derrick Henry last season. So I want to go over this with you, Dave. In wins for the Titans last year, Derrick Henry averaged 18.7 fantasy points per game and averaged 20 rushing attempts per game and 100 rushing yards and at least a touchdown in each one of those games. When the Titans lost, Derrick Henry, half the amount of points, 9.5 fantasy points, only 13 rush attempts, and 0.4 touchdowns. The passing usage didn't change at all, actually, which is quite interesting. But I look at this and I see, okay, a guy who had twice as many points in wins as he did in losses, and nearly twice as many touches, twice as many touchdowns. Now he goes to a team that is going to be winning a lot and in control a lot. Round 2 ends up being a really good spot for running backs. And when I look at a guy who's got a really safe floor, a really high ceiling, and I like the value that I'm getting, even though it's not too much here in round 2, Derrick Henry becomes a favorite pick of mine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just done betting against Derrick Henry. I've tried for the last couple of years because
We
you
always
see
look
the
so foolish, all of
efficiency.
us.
What was that?
So we always look so foolish when we bet against
I
Derrick
know.
Henry every time, man. It's
I
nuts.
know. Yeah, and I mean, like he's already disproven so many trends that we expect. Like, he's getting up there in age, going into his age 30 season, a running back on a new team. Like all of the red flags are there. You look every efficiency metric that I care about, like the ability to generate yards after contact, the ability to break tackles. It's all going down. Like we've seen that for the last few years with Derrick Henry. But it doesn't matter because he still scores touchdowns and he can still rip off the breakaway runs every now and then. And he's going to be behind a good offensive line on a good offense now. So, as much as my process wants to say to fade Derrick Henry, I just can't do it. Like when I'm sitting there looking at Derrick Henry on the Baltimore Ravens in round 2, it's really hard not to draft him. So, I've been drafting quite a bit of Derrick Henry this year. And you talk about it, Lamar Jackson just doesn't rush near the goal line. And we saw that last year with Gus Edwards. I expect to see that again with Derrick Henry. Of course, this could be the year where everybody has said, like, we're done betting on Derrick Henry. This could be the year that the floor finally falls out from underneath him. But the upside is so high that, like, he has a realistic chance to score 20 touchdowns in this offense. And nobody else in round 2 is going to give you that sort of upside at the running back position. So I'm okay drafting Derrick Henry, even though there are some very obvious red flags.
Yeah, well, I think we talked about this previously, and I think this is a good episode to bring it up again. Roster build when looking at average draft position and how the board may fall to you. I think it makes perfect sense that if you're going to go with a guy like let's say in that first round you're going for a guy like a Jamar Chase or an Amon-Ra St.
Mhm.
Brown in the first round, and you really want to get a running back because you don't like where it falls off to in rounds 3 and 4. Derrick Henry becomes one of those last good running backs that you know you've got a safe floor with. So it makes a lot of sense there in round two.
Yeah, so I'm totally a-okay with it, and I think that's crazy too, just like the way that we've seen ADP shift this year, where wide receivers are getting steamed up boards, like
Yeah.
Derrick Henry, a guy who has been a top 5 running back for so long and is now in an improved situation in Baltimore. Derrick Henry feels like he should be going like 7th, 8th, ninth off the board. The fact that you can get him towards the middle or back of round 2 is just crazy. Like, it's just the markets have shifted so much this year. It doesn't feel right. And when you look at a team after, like you said, you get one of these guys, a Jamar Chase, a Tyreek Hill, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, one of those guys in round 1, and then pair him up with a Derrick Henry. You look at that team after you're done drafting it, and it just looks unbelievable. Like, it doesn't seem like a team that should be able to be built, but you can do it this year with the shifts in ADP.
Yeah, the ADP, you mentioned that for wide receivers. 21 wide receivers are going in the first 36 picks. In
Wow.
that same range, we're seeing only two quarterbacks, two tight ends, and then we're looking at it looks like 11 running backs in that time. It's a wide receivers world right now in fantasy football. So whenever you can find good players at the other positions, take that shot. All right, Dave. Let's go to our next guy here. This one's very interesting because I'm looking at it right now, and the ADP is all over the board. I'm seeing
Mhm.
him as high as the 19th pick in round two, and then I'm seeing him as low as pick 45, all the way at the end of round four. Talk to us about Jaylen Waddle, who his average draft position right now is round three, pick seven.
Yeah, and going off the board is wide receiver 18, which means you can get this guy as your wide receiver 2, which he should be drafted as a wide receiver 2, but he has a wide receiver 1 upside easily. Now, I'm going to do my best not to bore the audience here. I know that like when I start spitting out a ton of numbers, I can lose the audience, but bear with me because I'm gonna tell a story, and the
I like
backbone
stories.
of this story is based in numbers. So, year one, Jaylen Waddle, rookie season, first round pick. We saw elite usage, but not so great efficiency. He was 10th in the NFL in targets. He was 17th in target share, but his efficiency, he was 88th in target depth. He was 42nd in yards per route run. So he was up there in usage, like they were getting in the ball a lot, but they were getting in the ball pretty much at the line of scrimmage, and he wasn't doing much with the ball in his hands. But we said, hey, we want to bet on this profile because targets are earned. He's earning the targets. Let's bet on Jaylen Waddle going into year 2. And then, of course, Tyreek Hill joined the team. And that's when we saw that efficiency fall, or I'm sorry, we saw that usage fall off a cliff. Going into year 2, he was 32nd in target share. But his target depth, where he was controlling and commanding these targets, jumped from 6.3 yards downfield to 12.1 yards downfield. He basically doubled his target depth. And in that year with Tyreek Hill, he was fourth in the NFL in yards per route run, and he was first in the NFL in yards per target and yards per reception. So again, a lot of numbers here, but he had bad usage in year 2 and elite efficiency, which is the complete opposite of what we saw his rookie season. And then in year 3, we kind of saw this homeostasis where the usage was there
Big
and the
word.
efficiency was there. Thank you. Yeah, I've been studying up for this show.
Science.
So in year 3, he was 10th in target rate. His target depth fell at 10.1, which was kind of in between what we saw in year 1 and year 2, and he was 8th in yards per route run. So, his ability to draw targets was elite. His efficiency was also elite. The issue, he missed 3 games. He was limited to less than 70% of the team snaps in 8 games. Like, this guy was just living in the blue tent last year. So, year 1, we see a guy who is commanding the ball an elite rate and not efficient with it. Year 2, we see a guy that is struggling to command the ball, but he's elite with his opportunities. And then in year 3, he's getting elite usage and elite efficiency, and he's injured. So, what I see here going into year 4, if he could just stay healthy, we've seen him now be a guy who can command the ball at an elite rate and be elite with the usage. I know Tyreek Hill is there, but there's still the path with how targeted the funnel tree is in Miami that Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle could both realistically finish as top 12 wide receivers. If he's able to stay healthy, I just see the ceiling here being so high. The team clearly likes him. They've locked him up through 2028. And right now in drafts, he's going behind Michael Pittman, Debo Samuel, Travis Etienne, Devon Achane, Kyron Williams, Chris Olave, Devontae Adams. I prefer all of those guys outright ahead of Jaylen Waddle. I think we should be drafting this guy as a back end wide receiver 1, but you can get him in round 3 or 4 in some of your drafts.
For those wondering, homeostasis is a self regulating process in living organisms that allow them to maintain a stable internal environment while adjusting to external conditions.
Yeah, that's pretty
Just thought
much
we'd
what Jaylen Waddle did in year 3, right?
our audience learns so much. So we are transcending fantasy football at this point. Jaylen Waddle, the fact that he can go in potentially the fourth round of a draft, and by the way, the platforms in which he's going in the fourth round right now are CBS and ESPN, two highly used draft platforms that many of our audience might be using, and friends of audiences, and if you have multiple home leagues or anything like that, they're probably using those. Which, by the way, I'd also recommend. There's a lot of good apps out there for your fantasy league, so try them all. Try them all.
I'll just say
Uh,
if his ADP is in round 4, I wouldn't wanna risk waiting to round 4
oh,
and
get him in
hoping that
round
I
three.
get him. Yeah, I'd reach for Jalen Waddle a whole round ahead of ADP on those platforms just because even in round 3, he is a smash pick. I wouldn't wanna play the ADP chicken game and hope that he
Right.
falls to me in round 4. I would just outright go out and grab him in round 3 on those platforms.
There you go. So there's a perfect example of the question that we asked earlier on the audio side: is how high would you be willing to reach on one of these players if the ranking versus the ADP is just a little bit different there. All right, I'm going to give you my last player here. And this is a guy I've talked about before as being one of the safer plays in fantasy football. And I just continue to believe that. And it's Isiah Pacheco. He is being drafted right now as the running back 11 in the third round, pick 8. And as I was doing this, I was between either Travis Kelce or Isiah Pacheco. And I went with the guy that I believe is trending upward on this same offense, this Kansas City Chiefs offense. And not necessarily like that Travis Kelce is trending downward, but it seems more of like him sort of staying afloat. I don't necessarily know that Travis Kelce is going to be better than he was last year. Whereas Isiah Pacheco, he actually can be better than he was last year. Looking back at it, he was fourth in rushing share and 11th in total opportunities last season. This is a guy who's getting volume. And honestly, that's what we want. We want running backs who get volume. And especially if they can get volume in a very good offense. We talked about 10xing your value before. Like this is, once again, this is 3, 4, 5xing your value here when you get a running back that can get value, or excuse me, volume in a good offense. And by the way, all that rushing share, the opportunities, everything, that's with him getting just 54% of the snaps in the first half of the season, weeks 1 through 8. And then all of a sudden, in the back half of the season, it jumped to 70% of the running back snaps. And then the team really, really just shouldered everything on Isiah Pacheco when they got into the playoffs. And that's something that won't be mentioned or thought of too much when we talk about fantasy football, is how much he meant to that team in the playoffs. And teams really carry that over from one year to the next. Now you look at the Chiefs depth chart, there's no Jerick McKinnon stealing work. And in those games without McKinnon, Isiah Pacheco was averaging 20 touches per game, 100 total yards per game, and 20 PPR points per game. If we look at 20 PPR points per game over the course of a season, once again, I know this is dangerous to extrapolate like that, but 20 PPR points per game over the season would have made him the running back 3 on the season. I'm not saying it is a direct translation that Isiah Pacheco is all of a sudden going to be the RB3 overall because Jerick McKinnon is gone, but I am saying that it is within the range of possibilities. And when I can draft this player with a high floor as the running back 11 in the third round on a great offense where everything appears to be improving for him, I'm going to do that 10 times out of 10.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing with Isaiah Pacheco, and I talked about this after his rookie season, and I don't want to pat myself in the back too hard here, but the rookie season, like the big red flag that everybody knocked Isaiah Pacheco for was his lack of receiving work, that he saw almost no targets as a rookie. And then all of a sudden in the playoffs, we saw him getting utilized as a receiver. And I said, hold on, this is a good, promising sign. Like if they're using him in the receiving game during the playoffs, that might translate into year 2. And sure enough, he quadrupled his target share from year 2 into year 3, or from year 1 into year 2. No reason to think that he can't continue to improve on that with McKinnon out of the picture now. So Isaiah Pacheco is a guy, like, we've seen the floor, we've seen that he likes to run the ball a lot, but I think we haven't even seen close to the ceiling if he can just become a true 3 down back and take a stranglehold on the passing down work as well here.
We talked about the differences in average draft position. You go and look for Isaiah Pacheco on a platform like ESPN, where you might see that some of its drafters will value running back a bit more. He's going as the 17th overall pick. We're talking about a guy that's going dead center of the second round. And then if we start to move around, you go to DraftKings or other spots here. Isiah Pacheco's going as pick 48, pick 41, pick 39. The ADP is all over the place.
Mhm.
I'd say that him being the running back 11 feels about right. I think you and I each have him as like the running back 10, Dave, if I'm not mistaken. Um, I think we'd both be willing to take him early third round. I don't know if I'm taking him in the second, but I think I'd be willing to take him early third round if I'm sitting there with one of those picks. How about you?
Yeah, round 3 is totally fair, and he's a guy that I've been drafting quite a bit of. There's not all the guys that we talked about, but there's a theme with some of the guys that we've discussed, Amon-Ra St.Brown and Isiah Pacheco specifically, guys that don't have good draft capital. And I think people just
Mhm.
hold on to that for years and they say, well, Isiah Pacheco was a seventh round pick and Amon-Ra St. Brown was a fourth round pick. But at a certain point, you just need to stop caring about draft capital because Isiah Pacheco has proven that he's here to stay. Amon-Ra St. Brown has proven that he's here to stay. Sure, like you want to start looking 3, 4, 5 years down the road, getting deep into like dynasty game theory and stuff. Sure, like the odds for these guys to continue producing come 2028 might be a little bit slimmer than the guys that were drafted in round 1 or 2, but we don't care about that. We're talking fantasy football for the 2024 season, and both Isiah Pacheco and Amon-Ra St. Brown are going to be focal points of the respective offenses.
All right, let's get to the last player here. Where Dave, you want to talk about Cooper Kupp, who is being drafted right now as the wide receiver 21. He is going as the last pick of the third round. We are seeing his ADP go as high as the 23rd overall player, so end of the second. We're seeing him fall as low as number 60
What do you
overall at the
do in
end of the
MFL?
fifth. Um, I'm I'm very confused by this, but I think that there's a lot of questioning amongst drafters of can I trust this guy? Is it over? If we get a bad season from Derrick Henry or an injury plague season from Derrick Henry, does the same type of question come up with these veterans? It's very interesting. I get the trepidation from people, but I think at where he's going, Dave, this ends up being such a good. This is the type of pick that wins you your league. Cooper Cup here at the end of the third round.
Yeah, and then it could lose your league too, all right? Like, he's one of
Fair.
my favorite picks, but I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that there isn't risk in drafting Cooper Kupp. But I think all of that risk is baked into his ADP right now. And sure, he could have another down year, but the upside there is just so alluring. And, we talked a lot when we were doing this ranking series last week about kind of looking in the mirror and facing our biases. And Cooper Cup is a guy that I've loved his entire career. And he was a guy that I was saying should be drafted as the 103 off the board last year. And then he got injured and he had a down year. And my initial set of rankings when the season ended had Cooper Cup very low. And I said, well, he fell off the age cliff. He's done. That's the end. And I didn't really want to draft Cooper Cup, but as I'm making it through the offseason and I'm forcing myself to kind of face these biases head on, I realized that there is still reason to draft Cooper Cup. I mean, we look at what he did from 2021 to 2022. He had double digit fantasy points in every single outing. He scored 20 plus points in 80% of his games over a 2 year stretch. And he scored 30 plus points in almost a third of his games over a 2 year stretch. That's bonkers. I mean, this guy was averaging over 25 points per game.
Bonk.
Bonkers, bananas,
Fun
whatever you want
word.
to call it. It was crazy. And then last year, he picked up a preseason hamstring injury. He missed the first 4 weeks of the season. Puka Nacua broke out. Then he got re injured in weeks 9 and 10. Like it was just a weird, bad year for Cooper Cup. And I think a lot of people are just viewing this now as like, well, Puka Nacua is the wide receiver 1, and we're going to draft him in round 1. And Cooper Cup is the wide receiver 2, and we're going to draft him in round 4 or round 3 or wherever he's going on different platforms. But I'm just not sure if that's the case because when these guys were playing and on the field together, targets were split almost exactly down the middle, 99 going to Cup and 100 going to Puka Nacua. But Cup had a stranglehold on the targets near the red zone. Once they got inside the 20-yard line, Cooper Cup had more targets, receptions, touchdowns, and that was despite missing time. Like, I'm not talking on a per game basis. Like, Cooper Cup overall had more red zone usage, even though he was hurt or injured or limited in almost half the games that he played last season. So, betting on a wide receiver to bounce back after a down year going into his age 31 season is typically a losing bet, but it does happen. I mean, look at Keenan Allen in 2022. He was banged up. Everybody said, well, the floor's falling out from Keenan Allen. he started his trend downward, and then he bounced back last year, and he gave us a top 5 finish. It wouldn't surprise me one bit if Cooper Cup does the same exact thing this year. So far from a sure thing, could be trending downward, but I'm just willing to bet on that right now. This guy was one of the most dominant receivers we've ever seen in NFL history over a 2 year stretch just 2 years ago. And right now he's getting drafted behind Stephon Diggs and Michael Pittman and DK Metcalf. And I'm just easily leaning towards Cup, who has so much more upside.
Yeah, I mean Cooper Cup, it was really which player were you getting that week when he was on the field? There were 5 games where he was outside of the top 40, and then he had 5 games where he's inside the top 24, specifically 4 games where, excuse me, 4 games where he's inside the top 12. This is still very much a guy. It's not like he just fell off towards the end of the season. Let's say similar to like a Stephon Diggs, where just things didn't look right anymore. This was just a season of ups and downs and injuries, right? And struggles with that team. Uh, I think Cooper Cup could be that guy that really unlocks some fantasy teams here in 2024, Dave.
Yeah, and I think the comparison, which is obviously an outlier, like you can't bet on this to happen, but Keenan Allen, he missed 7 games in 2022. He was banged up, and that was his age 30 season. And then last year at age 31, he bounced back and had a career year. I just like, is that assuredly going to happen for Cooper Cup? Absolutely not. I can't promise you that, but the upside is certainly there. And I think even if he kind of hits his floor outcome, which I'm not talking about his injury floor outcome. I mean, the floor outcome for every player is a catastrophic injury on the first snap of the season. But like if Cooper Cup stays healthy, I think his floor is that he's still going to pull 130 or 140 targets. Of course, he could get injured, and that could happen to any receiver. And as they get older, the increase of or the chance of injury is only going to increase. But I think if Cooper Cup stays healthy, you're looking at a rock solid floor, and you're still looking at the same top 3 ceiling that we drafted him for last year. Yeah, it's one of those things where as soon as the season ended and I started dabbling in drafts right after the season, I didn't want anything to do with Cooper Cup. And now as I'm starting to just shed some of my biases and trying to look at these situations as objectively as possible, Cooper Cup is a great pick in round 3.
Well, there you have it. We got 6 players that are some of our favorite targets here in early rounds, and we're going to keep doing this. We're going to keep going through the rest of drafts and average draft position. We're going to be back on Wednesday looking at our favorite mid-round targets, and Friday we're giving you our favorite late-round targets. So really all you have to do is watch this week, and you've got a really nice roadmap where you can either follow Team Dave, Team Alfredo, or a bit of both, and just figure out who are going to be some of your favorite players to target in each of these rounds. Don't forget, make sure you are subscribed to the daily news updates from Football Guys, where you're going to get that sent straight to your email inbox every day from Joe Bryant himself. As always, I want to thank you guys for watching and listening all the way through. For myself, for Dave, thanks. We'll see you next time. Adios.